Why do you keep getting taken advantage of by people who pretend to care? Why does it seem like those with the loudest smiles often carry the sharpest blades behind their back? You do everything right. You're loyal, patient, thoughtful, and yet, somehow, you always end up being the one hurt, used, or discarded. If this pattern feels familiar, it's not by accident. You've been trained to be open, emotionally predictable, and available. And those traits, in the wrong hands, make you easy to control. This is not a character flaw. This is design. And the ones who manipulate you understand that design better than you do. Machiavelli knew this truth centuries ago. In a world where power is the real currency and perception is more valuable than intention, those who survive aren't always the kindest. They're the ones who learn how to not be manipulated. This is how to never be manipulated again, Machiavelli's strategy for power. Most people don't realize when they're being manipulated because manipulation isn't always loud. It doesn't always come dressed as cruelty. Often, it's a compliment that arrives too quickly, a favor that demands repayment later, a guilt trip masked as love. It comes disguised in kindness, trust, and urgency. It doesn't demand, it persuades. It doesn't threaten, it softly rearranges your emotions until you act out of guilt instead of will. Psychologically, this is known as covert manipulation, a form of influence that operates below your conscious awareness, guiding your actions through emotional pressure instead of reason. Studies in behavioral psychology have shown that human beings are more likely to respond to subtle social cues, like facial expressions, tone of voice, and perceived authority, than to logic. In other words, if someone can make you feel like you're disappointing them, you're more likely to give in. This is not just emotion. It's neurological conditioning. You're taught from a young age to avoid confrontation, to smooth things over, to not make people uncomfortable. And over time, that becomes your default operating system. Keep the peace. Be polite. Don't push back. And without realizing it, you've given others the instruction manual on how to bend you. Machiavelli saw this as the first mistake of those who end up powerless. The belief that goodness will protect you, that if your intentions are pure, others will treat you with fairness. But fairness, in Machiavellian terms, is not a rule. It's a tool, a mask, something people wear when it benefits them. He wrote, "Men should be either treated generously or destroyed, because they take revenge for slight injuries. For heavy ones, they cannot." It sounds cold, doesn't it? That's because you've been taught that emotional warmth is always noble. But Machiavelli didn't preach cruelty for its own sake. He advocated clarity. He believed that power requires you to understand people not as you wish they were, but as they truly are. And many people, when given the chance, will take advantage of your softness if it serves them. The manipulators don't always look like villains. They often look like lovers, friends, family, mentors, people who say just the right words with just the right timing to keep you in place. And the reason it works is because they've studied your reactions. They know what makes you feel guilty. They know how much silence you can take before you break. They know that if they withdraw affection, you'll work harder to win it back. This is not love. This is a system. The system of manipulation is built on one simple truth. People are more controllable when they fear disconnection. And the more you fear losing someone, their approval, their attention, their validation, the more power they have over you. Even if they never raise their voice, never make a direct demand, all they have to do is show disappointment, a sigh, a change in tone, a glance that says, "You let me down," and you adjust, you give in, you surrender. This is not your fault, but it is your responsibility to change, And that's where Machiavelli's thinking becomes useful. Not to manipulate others, but to never be manipulated again. Most people think manipulation happens in obvious moments, when someone lies, pressures, or threatens. But real manipulation is quieter. It happens in the space between words, in the way someone phrases a request so it sounds like your idea, in how they shift blame subtly enough that you don't notice you've accepted it. And the reason it works so well is because most people are trained to respond, not to observe. Machiavelli believed that the first step to power was learning how to see the world without illusions. He wrote, "The vulgar crowd always is taken by appearances." That's where manipulators thrive, in your assumptions. You assume someone who praises you won't betray you. Someone who's vulnerable with you won't harm you. Someone who needs you won't use you. But the truth is, manipulation only works when you're predictable, when your emotions follow a script, when the manipulator knows that if they say the right words or stay silent long enough, you'll do what they want. So how do you stop being predictable? You learn to control one thing: your response. The easiest people to manipulate are the ones who explain too much, the ones who rush to defend themselves, the ones who can't tolerate being misunderstood, and the ones who need to be seen as good. That need to be perceived as kind, agreeable, reasonable becomes your leash. A skilled manipulator won't even have to pull it. They'll just look at it, and you'll tighten it yourself. But here's the truth. Machiavelli understood. Your silence is more powerful than your explanation. Your unpredictability is more valuable than your goodness, and your ability to walk away calmly, without drama, is the single greatest weapon against manipulation. Because when someone doesn't know how you'll react, they can't plan their moves. When you don't rush to fix things, they're forced to sit in the discomfort they tried to project onto you. And when you don't need to be understood, you become untouchable. This isn't about being cold, it's about being clear. And in the next part, we'll talk about the exact mindset shifts Machiavelli taught, not to dominate others, but to take back control of your energy, your attention, and your peace. Niccolò Machiavelli didn't romanticize human nature. He studied it. He watched how people behaved, not when things were easy, but when power was at stake. And what he found was simple. Most people act out of self-interest, even when they say it's for love, loyalty, or principle. That doesn't mean everyone is cruel, but it does mean that in a world where resources, attention, affection, influence are limited, people often choose themselves, sometimes quietly, sometimes at your expense. This is why Machiavelli warned against trusting appearances. He wrote, "Everyone sees what you appear to be. Few experience what you really are." And the same is true in reverse. You only see what others want you to see until it's too late. To protect yourself, you need to stop looking at surface traits, charm, politeness, connection, and start looking at patterns. Watch how people respond to your boundaries. Watch how they act when you say no. Watch who only calls you when they need something. Watch who praises you just enough to keep you close, but never enough to let you feel secure. Machiavelli's strategy wasn't about being paranoid. It was about being observant. He believed that power belongs to those who can stay emotionally detached while watching others reveal themselves. That's the next shift. If you want to never be manipulated again, you must learn to observe instead of react. Most manipulation begins when you speak too quickly. You try to explain your intentions. You try to clarify what you meant. You try to justify why you feel the way you do. And in doing that, you hand over your power. Not because you're wrong, but because you're too emotionally involved to see what's really happening. But when you observe first, when you don't rush in with words, people reveal more than they intended. Their tone, their timing, their body language, their patterns, All of it becomes data, and that data tells you what no confession ever will. This is what Machiavelli meant when he said, "It is much safer to be feared than loved." Not because fear is better, but because love, when used without discernment, can blind you. Protecting yourself doesn't mean becoming cold. It means becoming selective, disciplined, quiet in the right moments, sharp in others. That's the difference between someone who is manipulated and someone who moves with strategy. Machiavelli understood that most people give too much too early, too much emotion, too much trust, too much access. And once someone knows what triggers you, what makes you feel guilty, what makes you panic, they can control you without lifting a finger. This is why he advised rulers to appear open and generous, while keeping their true motives guarded. He didn't mean to deceive for fun. He meant, don't hand over the map to your emotions just because someone asks nicely. That applies to you too. Not everyone should know how to reach you, how to shake you, how to get inside your mind. And the moment you realize that, something shifts. You begin to respond slower. You begin to listen more than you speak. You begin to say less, not because you're hiding, but because you're not trying to convince anyone of anything. That stillness is power. And manipulators hate it. Because manipulation depends on a reaction. It depends on you feeling guilty, or confused, or emotionally attached. When you don't react the way they expect, the control fades. They lose their grip, not because you fought back, but because you didn't play. There's a study in the Journal of Experimental Psychology that showed people who speak less during negotiations tend to be perceived as more powerful. Why? Because silence creates tension, and in that tension, people reveal themselves. The same rule applies to your life. When you stop explaining yourself, people show you who they really are. When you delay your response, they expose their intent. When you stop giving them easy access to your emotions, they either respect your space or show you that they never intended to. This isn't about being difficult. It's about being clear. Quiet boundaries are often louder than spoken ones, because you don't need to say, "You crossed the line." You just never open that door again. Machiavelli believed that a ruler should know how to appear flexible while never losing control of the center. That applies to you. Be kind, but don't be available to anyone who tests your peace. Be warm, but not open to those who only show up when they need something. Be respectful, but not obedient to those who confuse attention with ownership. When you start pulling your energy back from the wrong people, everything starts to shift, and not always peacefully. Because once you stop reacting the way they've come to expect, some people won't know how to handle you anymore. They'll call you distant, cold, selfish, not because you've become any of those things, but because you're no longer predictable. Machiavelli observed that power isn't just about what you do, it's about how others perceive your movements. He believed that when people can no longer read you, they lose their advantage. That's what happens when you stop explaining, stop apologizing, stop softening the truth to make others comfortable. You become unreadable, and unreadable means unmanageable. Some people won't like that, especially those who benefited from your constant emotional availability. They'll test you, not because they're curious, but because they want to reset the dynamic. They'll poke, guilt trip, question your change. But if you stay grounded, they'll show their true face. And what once felt like love or friendship will be revealed for what it was: control. This moment is difficult because it breaks an old identity, the one where you needed to be liked, needed to be agreeable, needed to be chosen. But here's the truth: you don't need to be liked by people who only value your silence when it serves them. You don't need to be chosen by anyone you had to shrink yourself to impress. Real power, the kind that cannot be manipulated, is quiet, it's calm, it's rooted in self-respect, not performance. You no longer explain your boundaries. You simply keep them. You no longer chase clarity. You create it. You don't argue to be understood. You stay still and let people misunderstand if they need to. Machiavelli believed that those who master perception win before the battle even begins. You don't have to fight to protect yourself. You just need to stop handing over your power in the form of constant access. Stop being emotionally available to people who don't know how to handle it with care. You'll lose some people, that's true, but you'll gain something better: your peace, your clarity, and your control. Because once you understand how manipulation works, and more importantly, once you stop being emotionally programmable, you don't just survive manipulation, you become immune to it. There's something unnerving about a person who doesn't flinch, doesn't over-explain, doesn't respond the way you expect. That kind of person carries a certain gravity, not because they're aggressive, not because they dominate the room, but because they're rooted, grounded, unshakable. That's the kind of presence Machiavelli respected, not the loudest, but the most self-possessed. If you want to never be manipulated again, it's not enough to recognize the tactics. You have to remove the levers people use to pull you. That means noticing what still controls you: your need to be seen, your fear of abandonment, your impulse to overgive, your discomfort with silence. Manipulators don't create your weaknesses, they find them. They exploit what already exists. So if guilt gets you to bend, they'll use guilt. If silence makes you chase, they'll withhold. If validation makes you feel safe, they'll sprinkle just enough of it to keep you hooked. That's why awareness isn't just intellectual. It has to become physical. You have to feel it when you're about to give in, when you're about to apologize for something you didn't do, when you're about to explain yourself to someone who isn't listening. That pause, that microsecond of stillness, is your power coming back online. You don't have to change everything overnight. You start with small shifts. You say, "Let me get back to you," instead of "yes" on command. You wait 30 seconds before answering a question designed to provoke you. You let a manipulative silence hang in the air without rushing to fill it. And in that space, something happens. You start to see clearly. You notice how often people try to make you the problem when you set a boundary. You hear the way their tone shifts when they realize you're not reacting. You feel how much calmer you become when you're not performing, fixing, or explaining. This clarity becomes addictive because it's real. You're no longer trying to protect an image of being good, kind, understanding. You're actually protecting your peace. You're no longer proving that you deserve respect. You're embodying it. Machiavelli didn't ask you to be cruel. He asked you to be aware. He didn't say, "Never trust." He said, "Never trust blindly." He didn't preach dishonesty. He warned against naivety. Because in a world full of masks, the most powerful thing you can do is know your own face. And when you know who you are, when you're no longer ruled by guilt, fear, or the need for approval, no one can reach into your life and move you without your permission. They can try, but they'll find nothing to grip, because you're no longer reactive. You're strategic, you're sovereign, you're free. Freedom doesn't always feel powerful at first. In fact, the moment you stop being manipulated, truly stop, it feels unsettling. There's silence where there used to be chaos, distance where there used to be constant demands. You're no longer dancing around someone else's expectations. You're no longer adjusting your words to keep the peace. You're simply still. And that stillness can feel like loneliness, because for so long, manipulation felt like connection, drama felt like intimacy, chasing approval felt like love. And without it, you begin to ask yourself, what's left? Who am I when I'm no longer pleasing? Who am I when I'm not useful? When I don't rush to fix things that aren't mine to fix? That question is the beginning of something Machiavelli pointed to in his writings, a type of inner rule. He spoke about ruling cities, states, armies, but what many overlook is the deeper message. Before you can master the world, you must first master yourself. The person who is no longer manipulated is not numb. They feel everything, but they don't act from impulse. They don't lash out. They don't chase clarity from those who offer confusion. They don't negotiate their self-worth. This doesn't mean you become detached from life. It means you become deliberate. You choose your words. You choose your battles. You no longer get pulled into emotional traps because you see them before they're even set. And this has a ripple effect. People begin to approach you differently. Some pull away, not because you did anything wrong, but because they were never there for the real you. They were there for the role you played, for your emotional accessibility, your readiness to absorb their projections, your silence when they crossed your limits. But when those performances stop, so do they. It stings, but then it liberates, because now the people who remain and the people who show up meet you at a different frequency. They aren't drawn to your emotional availability. They're drawn to your clarity. They aren't looking to use you. They're looking to walk with you. That's the difference. And that difference is everything. Machiavelli understood that the strongest leaders, the ones who held power the longest, were not the most feared or even the most loved. They were the ones who saw clearly, moved precisely, and never gave anyone more power than they deserved. You're not here to become unfeeling. You're here to become unshakable. Because once you understand the strategy, once you see the game for what it is, you don't need to manipulate. You just need to stop being manipulated. And the moment you stop playing their game, you begin to create your own. One where your silence is respected. One where your presence is earned. One where your power is no longer something others can borrow, but something you own, quietly, fully, without apology. There's a moment when everything clicks. You stop second-guessing yourself. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head just to sound polite enough or clear enough. You stop walking on emotional glass. And instead, you just stand there, unbothered, unreadable, unmovable. That moment doesn't arrive with a dramatic event. It comes quietly, like an internal shift. You realize you no longer have the urge to fix someone else's discomfort. You notice when someone is baiting you into a reaction, and you simply don't take the bait. You're calm, not because you're passive, but because you're in control. Machiavelli taught that real power is not exercised in grand gestures. It's found in subtle movements, in what's withheld, the ability to pause before responding, the decision not to respond at all, the courage to allow silence to speak where words would only weaken your position. Think of all the times you gave too much, explained your boundaries, over-apologized, tried to earn back respect from someone who never intended to give it to you in the first place. Those were not signs of weakness. They were signs that you hadn't yet learned how to sit inside your own power. But now you have. Now you recognize the patterns, how manipulation often comes disguised as flattery, urgency, guilt, or even affection. You feel the shift in your body when someone is trying to move you emotionally. You trust that sensation. You no longer override it with logic. You don't need proof when you feel misalignment. You just leave. You let go. That's strategy. That's Machiavellian. And that's not cruelty. That's wisdom. When you stop giving people access to your emotional center, you force them to engage with your boundaries instead of your weakness. They no longer get to control the rhythm of your decisions. They no longer know which strings to pull. And if they try, it's obvious, awkward, and ineffective. And you remain calm, not cold, just clear. There's no more convincing, no more performing, no more dancing around discomfort just to make someone else comfortable. You walk into rooms differently. You speak less, but say more. You become the person others hesitate to test, not out of fear, but out of respect. They sense you've done the work, that there's nothing for them to manipulate because you've already made peace with not being liked, not being understood, not being needed. And that is real power. Not the kind that controls others, the kind that no one can take from you. When you finally arrive at this place, this inner stillness, you start to realize something most people never do. Manipulation only works on the version of you that needs permission to exist. The version that couldn't handle silence, the one that over-explained, that felt guilty for having needs, that softened its own boundaries just to avoid discomfort. That person was easier to mold, easier to manage, easier to manipulate. But you are no longer that version. Now, your peace isn't up for negotiation. Your time isn't available on command. Your emotions aren't open territory for anyone to explore and exploit. And that clarity, that unwavering sense of self, doesn't just protect you. It changes how you move through the world. You stop chasing apologies. You stop trying to be the bigger person when it costs you everything. You stop assigning meaning to people's silence or distance. You stop asking why they changed, because you're no longer bending to make them stay. You begin to notice who falls away when your energy is no longer easily accessible, and you let them. Because the truth is, they were never with you. They were with the version of you that was easy to influence, easy to guilt, easy to keep in line. When that version disappears, their interest fades. And that's not loss, that's alignment. Machiavelli never promised that this path would make you popular. He never claimed that power would come without cost. But he did know that when you become someone others can't easily move, manipulate, or deceive, you become rare. And what is rare is respected. So now the question is no longer, how do I stop being manipulated? The question becomes, who do I become when I'm no longer controlled by fear, guilt, or approval? And that answer, you won't find it in others. You'll find it in silence, in space. In every moment, you choose strategy over reaction, clarity over chaos, presence over performance. You don't need to announce your boundaries. You don't need to defend your peace. You don't need to explain your distance. You just need to embody it, quietly, consistently, unapologetically. Because once you stop being emotionally accessible to manipulators, something profound happens. You become untouchable. If this spoke to the part of you that's tired of being controlled, share your thoughts in the comments. Let me know. What was the moment you realized you were being played? And if you're ready to move in silence and reclaim your power, subscribe to the channel. We speak for the ones who are done being predictable.